Harvey devastation, protecting downtown Houston from flooding as the rain refuses to recede. What Catholic groups are doing. Transgender ban. The president directs the Pentagon to implement his block for transgender people entering the military. We have reaction from the White House. New papal trip. The Vatican announces the Pope is heading to Asia. We'll go to Rome for a preview. And will you? How a man uses an already memorable moment to ask his girlfriend an important question. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, August 28, 2017.
There's water in all the beds in the house. We've lost every strip of furniture, every couch, everything.
Hurricane Harvey leaves widespread damage across Texas, and the danger continues tonight, but help is on the way as several Catholic charities, along with others, mobilize to help the flood victims. Thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. We're going to be here for years. That's what the Federal Emergency Management Agency says about cleanup, as President Trump issues a major disaster declaration for 18 Texas counties. The president is heading there tomorrow with the First Lady to survey the storm-battered area where at least 6 people have died. Harvey continues to devastate with massive flooding.
This is a landmark event.
Catastrophic flooding continues in Texas as Harvey drenches the state. Rain bands are pummeling the area with no signs of letting up. Harvey is forecasted to head back into the Gulf of Mexico before it moves toward the Texas-Louisiana border, exacerbating an already difficult situation. Authorities stressing the potential danger people still face.
Life-sustaining mission.
Many of those who stayed in Houston ended up trapped in their homes.
Some of our neighbors are still back there on the rooftops. We saw the boat come by first, and we took the first chance we could get out of there.
Other Texas cities are welcoming Houston's displaced residents. Dallas is opening a mega shelter at the convention center, and San Antonio has put together contingency plans to house hurricane evacuees.
And Catholics across the country are springing into action to help the disaster victims. Jason Calvi is here to show us how they're mobilizing and what you can do to pitch in.
Lauren, Catholic Charities and the Society of St. Vincent de Paul and the Knights of Columbus are all asking for your help tonight. The needs are immense. Hurricane winds and then 30 inches of rain soaking some parts of Texas. That's all the way up to the bottom of my jacket. And with saturated ground like that, the water has nowhere to go but people's homes.
Are you okay?
After losing everything in historic flooding, Aaron Mitchell finally gets some good news. His dad is alive.
Dad, I love you.
Mitchell is a native of one of the hardest hit spots, Rockport, Texas, where resident Joe Kirchens finds safety tonight.
It's a disaster zone. My house is still there. That's what I'm saying. It's still there. It's not okay. I mean, there's stuff destroyed everywhere.
St. Vincent de Paul Society's Disaster Services is deploying to help hurricane victims like these.
I'm glad that as Catholics we can witness by our presence. As a Texas resident, it's extremely personal for me, and it's painful to see so many people in suffering. But we have to just go forward with our mission.
St. Vincent de Paul asks for cash donations so survivors can buy food, clothing, and medicine. Joe Kirchens says they're desperate for the help.
Well, we need the community. We need the other communities, San Antonio, Dallas, the other states. You know, I see all these little fundraisers for all these other places. We need it here.
Catholic radio station KLUX is trying to help in its own way.
Hoping you've made it through the storm safely and with grace.
Broadcasting important information to listeners about the biggest storm to devastate America in more than a decade.
I've experienced a number of hurricanes in my lifetime with St. Vincent de Paul Disaster Services, and I have never seen the amount of flooding and widespread damage as we are seeing right now.
And if you're interested in heading down to Texas, St. Vincent de Paul says they really need volunteers. Their House in a Box program will deliver new furniture to families impacted in the impacted areas. But Lauren, that rebuilding is a long ways off as the rainwaters are really still surging still tonight.
It was shocking to me that FEMA said they're going to be there for years. And I've seen, when I went back after Hurricane Katrina to New Orleans 2 years later, they're still looking at devastation.
And still 25 more inches of rain expected to come. FEMA, or actually the National Weather Service, is saying that the peak flooding in the Houston area is going to be Wednesday, Thursday this week, so the storm is still not past.
Thank you so much, Jason Calvi reporting. President Trump indefinitely bans transgender individuals from serving in the military. It's the latest action he has taken to reverse an Obama-era policy that was more accepting of transgender troops. Correspondent Mark Irons reports from the White House. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. President Trump made the announcement Friday in a memo addressed to the Secretaries of Defense and Homeland Security. Last month, in a tweet, the president said transgender troops bring tremendous medical cost and disruption, but now he's issuing orders.
In a memorandum, the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces directed the military to ban openly transgender people from joining the military, saying they could hinder military effectiveness and lethality, disrupt unit cohesion, or tax military resources. And the Trump memo says that the military should halt all use of DoD or DHS resources to fund sex reassignment surgical procedures for military personnel, except to the extent necessary to protect the health of the individual who has already begun a course of treatment. Peter Sprigg works with the Family Research Council. His group crunched the numbers and says those payments for sex reassignment surgeries could have cost up to $3.7 billion over the next 10 years.
That's enough to buy an Aegis-class destroyer, to buy 22 fighter planes, to buy 116 Chinook helicopters. It can buy a lot of hardware.
But transgender troops say this is discrimination.
And the only thing we're asking for is to be treated just like everyone else in the military and to be discriminated against based only on our performance.
As for transgender individuals currently serving, the president is giving Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis the ability to decide their future.
I would hope that Secretary Mattis would look at this and not consider the politics of it. What does the military need? What are our requirements? What makes the person most fit medically and psychologically to serve in the military?
The president says the Secretary of Defense must have a plan for implementing this transgender ban by late February. Sex reassignment surgeries are slated to end this March. Lauren.
Mark, this presidential memo gives a lot of authority to Secretary of Defense Mattis.
That's right, Lauren. He has the power to decide if transgender troops currently serving stay or go. He can also recommend that this ban be reversed, but the memo reads he will have to convince the president.
Correspondent Mark Irons at the White House. Thank you, Mark. President Trump has issued a pardon for Joe Arpaio. The controversial former Arizona sheriff was found guilty in July of criminal contempt for disregarding a court order in a racial profiling case. The 85-year-old was set to be sentenced in October up to 6 months in jail. President Trump says Arpaio was a worthy candidate for pardon because of his more than 50 years of admirable service to our nation. And also on Friday night, Sebastian Gorka, it was announced, resigned from his position as a top counterterrorism advisor to President Donald Trump. Gorka's work for the president goes back as far as 2015. He was seen here on EWTN News Nightly several times. Says he's rejoining Breitbart News, where he was editor for national security affairs. The remains of all 10 of the missing USS John S. McCain sailors have been recovered. The naval destroyer collided with an oil tanker near Singapore last week. Officials searched for 80 hours before calling off search and rescue efforts on Wednesday. Since the crash, the commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet lost his job. The Navy also said it will investigate other recent collisions of U.S. warships in Asian waters. Pakistan reportedly snubs a top U.S. diplomat. This follows tough talk from President Trump. It is apparently fueling anti-American sentiment in the country. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee joins us from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Neither the State Department nor Pakistan's Foreign Ministry are saying why Acting Assistant Secretary of State Alice Wells was told to delay her trip, but the move comes amid rising tensions between the two countries. Pakistani police used tear gas and batons to disperse anti-American protesters in the southern city of Karachi. Officers took action when a group of students tried to march towards the U.S. consulate. This local Shiite leader says they're protesting President Trump's recent comments because they hurt the Pakistani people. Trump accused Pakistan of harboring militants who battle U.S. forces in Afghanistan.
We can no longer be silent about Pakistan's safe havens for terrorist organizations, the Taliban, and other groups that pose a threat to the region and beyond.
Following the president's speech, Assistant Secretary Alice Wells, who represents the State Department in South Asia, was scheduled to discuss America's new Afghanistan policy with the Pakistani leadership. But Pakistan's Foreign Office put the brakes on that visit until, quote, a mutually convenient time. Jim Phillips, a national security expert, agrees with President Trump that Pakistan is harboring terrorists.
The reason that the Taliban hasn't been defeated militarily inside Afghanistan is that it can always go over the border and rest and regroup and re-equip in Pakistan.
He says getting tough on Pakistan may hinder diplomacy for now, but it may pay off in the long run.
I think it's useful that the Pakistanis know they can no longer go behind our back to help the Taliban fight the Afghan government.
Now, Pakistan is defending its record, saying that its troops have made many sacrifices in the war on terror. Just last night, 2 Pakistani soldiers were killed when a bomb went off near the border of Afghanistan. Lauren?
Wyatt, how would the U.S. put more pressure on Pakistan?
Well, Lauren, the U.S. has many avenues here. They could cut foreign aid. They could also remove Pakistan from their designation as a major non-NATO ally. Now, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson says he doesn't want to have to do either of those things, but he thinks it's important, of course, that Pakistan takes action against the terrorists. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby at the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. Guatemalan President Jimmy Morales orders the expulsion of a highly praised UN anti-corruption commission. The decision comes as protesters take to the streets of Guatemala City to demand the president's resignation. The UN representative is working on corruption cases in the country. Morales has denied any wrongdoing. A car bomb rips through a busy market area in eastern Baghdad. 10 people are dead, dozens more injured. ISIS has claimed responsibility. It comes as troops continue to make progress pushing ISIS out of the northern town of Tal Afar. The Vatican announces Pope Francis will visit Myanmar and Bangladesh at the end of November. The Holy See released these logos ahead of the visit from November 27th to December 2nd. Roughly 1% of Myanmar's population is Catholic, and less than 0.25% in Bangladesh. Father Bernardo Cevalera, editor-in-chief of Asia News, a Catholic news organization, joins us from Rome. Father, welcome to the program.
Thank you for coming.
This is the first time a pope will visit Myanmar, predominantly Buddhist, and also he's headed to Bangladesh. Why is he doing that now?
He chose Myanmar. Myanmar has become a very important country because it is becoming democratic. He received some months ago Aung San Suu Kyi, the leader of the Pro-Democracy League, and also they restarted diplomatic relationships. So I think it is a good opportunity to go to Bangladesh and to Myanmar.
What is happening right now? He's doing this as Muslim refugees are fleeing the country. Does this have something to do with that, religious liberty?
There is a big problem with the Muslim refugees, the Rohingyas, so-called Rohingya. The Rohingya are a Bengali minority living. They have been living in Myanmar for a long time, for decades, but they don't have any citizenship right. The army are pushing them out of Myanmar. And also some nationalistic and Buddhist groups are doing this.
There's a lot of conflict there. Is it safe for the Pope?
Many conflicts. I think it is safe for the Pope in this sense that the Pope wants to show that there is a possibility of coexistence between all these minorities.
And I see that the theme is love and peace. Thank you so much for joining us, Father Bernardo Cevalera, Editor-in-Chief of Asia News.
Thanks to you.
Yesterday at the Vatican, Pope Francis prayed for those in Myanmar and Bangladesh.
Pito il Bangladesh, il Nepal e l'India.
During his Sunday Angelus address, the Holy Father said the persecution in Myanmar was sad news. He asked the faithful in St. Peter's Square to pray that God saves them and that they receive help.
Coming up, entering a plea. Undercover journalist David Daleiden appears in court as he fights a pro-life battle. And Radiant Magazine, how one woman decided to spread the beauty of Christ to young girls.
The governor of South Carolina signs an executive order directing state agencies not to allocate state and federal money to health providers affiliated with abortion clinics. In April, President Trump signed a law allowing states to deny certain funding to abortion providers, including Planned Parenthood. Arkansas is appealing a federal judge's order blocking the state from enforcing 4 new pro-life laws, including a ban on second trimester procedures. A judge issued an injunction late last month. And pro-life advocate David Daleiden enters a not guilty plea in a San Francisco court. Daleiden is facing charges from California prosecutors for his undercover videos showing the alleged selling of aborted baby body parts by Planned Parenthood and the group's partners. And teen suicide rates for girls are at an alarmingly high rate. In a new study by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, 2015 saw the highest rates for females between the ages of 15 and 19, the highest since 1975, and suicide has doubled from 2007 to 2015. Our next guest hopes to reverse that trend by publishing positive content for teenage girls to promote their self-esteem. Joining us now is Rose Ray, founder of Radiant Magazine, which is a quarterly periodical for young Catholic women. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
These are just beautiful, absolutely beautiful magazines, and the content, never give up, seek His will, here's a memorare, here's something, virtue quiz, there is beauty in virtue. This is just amazing, especially now when we're seeing publications like Teen Vogue, which in July published a guide on how to perform anal sex. Why are you doing this?
Yeah, there's been a lot of even secular resources like the CDC understanding and releasing that fact that teen suicide for young women is at a 40-year high. Time magazine did an article on why are the millennials depressed. We understand now that there's a problem with the young adults, especially the women, and so we want to be part of the solution.
Well, let's take a look at an example of the content in your magazine. In September's issue, there's an article titled 9 Ways to Know God's Will for Your Life. Here's a quote from it. Do not conform yourselves to this age, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind that you may discern what is the will of God. What a wonderful message. And I have to say, it is probably the thing that will help teens and helps adults more than anything else, which is to discern God's will.
Well, right, and there's just no peace basing our worth in the world. You've got friends who are mean. We've got social media commanding all of our attention, the world of selfies, right? You're probably going through that with your own children. It's all about the selfies. It's
constantly like this.
Smile! There's so much more, and everyone's getting educated. We have the most educated millennials we've ever had since the beginning of America, but that's not equaling happiness. They're lost, and they need to find their worth in finding out what God wants them to do. So this beautiful article amongst the modest fashion is just really telling them to take a step back. And what is God's will for their life?
What was your inspiration? How did the Holy Spirit come to you?
Oh, so beautiful. You know, we're all created to give something to this world, and I just really saw through the lies in the other publications. Edith Stein has such a beautiful quote where she says, "The world doesn't need what women have, the world needs what women are." And that's when I would read all the magazines like Cosmo, and I'm more than a position. I'm more than the clothes that I wear. What are we? We're temples of the Holy Spirit, and we need the girls to realize that. So we really speak to their heart and to their soul with these articles in their language.
Right. I can't wait to take this home and show my 13-year-old. Thank you so much, Rose Ray, founder of Radiant magazine, recently acquired by our Sunday visitor.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Up next, on this date, the author joins me in studio to tell us about religious freedom and Catholicism throughout history. Plus, a memorable proposal in front of Pope Francis.
Today, the church remembers St. Augustine, a doctor of the church. He's the son of St. Monica, whose feast day was yesterday. Augustine was a prodigal son before his conversion. He later became a priest and bishop. He is also a famed author, writing books such as The City of God and Confessions. Today marks the 54th anniversary of the March on Washington. More than 200,000 people packed into the nation's capital to hear Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech. It pressured then-President John F. Kennedy to initiate a federal civil rights bill in Congress. Today, religious leaders from various faiths honored the anniversary with the Ministers' March for Justice. America is rich with lessons in diversity and immigration and filled with characters from pilgrims to present times. Our next guest takes us through the calendar year from back alleys to one semi-famous story per day. Joining us now is Carl Cannon, author of On This Date and Washington bureau chief at Real Clear Politics, a website dedicated to bringing nonpartisan analysis. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
I know that you write every day a little snippet from history, and I, as you can see by all of my tabs, I'm loving your book, On This Date. I went through, I found all of the different Catholics through here. I went right through from Kennedy to Katie Ledecky to my favorite, the Dodger GM Campanis, who said that Campanis, right, who said that 2 times in his life, the hair stood up on his arms the first time he saw the Sistine Chapel, and
the second time when he saw Sandy Koufax throw a fastball.
Why did you write this book?
I wrote this book because I started we're at a time where we need things to unify us. And people get so excited, especially with Donald Trump in the White House, but even before, in the last few years, we're so partisan. But we have so much that unifies us, and if we know our history, we realize a few things about ourselves. One is that we're a welcoming country to immigrants. Let's just say that. I don't want to get into the debate, illegal,
Let's not
illegal.
talk about politics. Let's go on with your book, right?
But the other thing is that we're problem-solving people. When we have issues that we've dealt with in the past, and we deal with them, and we usually come out of it stronger than we were before.
Let's take a look at September 17th, 1960, Remember the Alamo. And this is a time when then candidate John Kennedy went to the Alamo. Tell us this. He says, "I am not the Catholic candidate for president." And then he attempted to go on to say what?
Well, remember, he went to the Houston Ministerial Association, all these Baptist pastors, at a time when Southern Baptists in this country and Southern religious people were fearful of a Catholic presidency. The Pope will be running Washington. I mean, it's a kind of hysteria. If you live through it, you can't forget it.
It says here, Greenville's oldest Methodist church said that a Catholic president would surely cut America's head off.
That's right. And so on the way there, he brings it up in West Virginia. He goes to North Carolina. But on the way to Houston for this showdown with these Baptist pastors, and Kennedy carried the day, that's when he said, "I'm not going to be the Catholic president, I'm going to be the president." But he stopped at the Alamo, and he asked his guys there, this Irish mafia, they called it, Kenny O'Donnell and Dave Powers and these people, find out how many Catholics died at the Alamo. Well, they couldn't find that out. But they gave him the next best thing, a list of Irish-American names.
Which most likely were probably Catholic, okay.
But Kennedy said it was perfect. It was even better because some of them were probably Protestant. He said, he read the Irish names and he said, we don't know how many of them were Catholic because there was no religious test at the Alamo.
Thank you so much for writing this book, for coming to visit me here at News Nightly. Carl Cannon, author of On This Date, Washington Bureau Chief at Real Clear Politics. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Finally tonight, Pope Francis meets with a group of lawmakers who are in Rome for the meeting of the International Catholic Legislators Network. Several U.S. lawmakers made it to the meetings, including Representatives Chris Smith, Andy Harris, and Jeff Fortenberry. But blah, 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 blah. Someone had a different kind of law in mind, marriage law, when he knelt on one knee in front of the Pope and proposed to his girlfriend. Looks like, from all of the smiles from the couple and the Pope, that she said yes. Imagine doing that in front of the Pope. What a blessed union they are going to have. Congratulations to them. That does it for us here at EWTN News Nightly. To all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless you.